morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for today's webinar, Understanding the Foundation of CMMC, How to Prepare and the Impact on Your Business. My name's Amy. I'm a member of the marketing team here at Perry Johnson Registrars, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar and offering technical support for our speakers. We're very excited to have a panel of industry experts joining us today, and they'll all be introduced to you a little bit later on in the webinar. Just before we get underway, I want to take care of a few housekeeping notes. To ensure audio quality, all participants are on mute. However, we do absolutely still want to take your questions. So please type any questions you have or anything you want to have some clarification on into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen, and we'll address as many of those questions as possible after the prepared slides. So this is just an example of how that question panel will look on your screen. You just open it up, type your question in, and click send, and that'll come into us and we will respond to those at the end. The two most frequent questions we get are usually regarding the availability of slides or the availability of a recording. And the answer to both of those questions is yes, we will have a recording available as well as the slides for your download if you want to share it with someone else in your organization, or if someone came in later, you have to leave early. That's no problem at all. So going ahead, I want to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. I'd like to introduce to you all Paul Demarin. He's the Senior Vice President of Food Safety, Supply Chain, and Cybersecurity at PJR. Paul joined us back in January. He has over 35 years of experience in the food, supply chain, and certification industry. Before he came to PJR, Paul worked for 16 years in the certification industry with clients in pretty much every sector, from safety and supply chain to security, brand protection and quality, EH&S, automotive, aerospace, medical, and information technology requirements. Before he came to the certification industry, Paul was a professional chef and a consultant for over 20 years, working in major hotel chains, restaurants, private golf courses, and food service organizations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Paul. And Paul, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Great, thank you very much, Amy. Good morning, everyone. I also want to thank you all for joining our webinar today. We truly appreciate your time. As Amy mentioned, my name's Paul. I'm extremely excited for today's session as we're having the opportunity to host an executive roundtable on the understanding the foundation of CMMC, how to prepare for it, and the impact that this will have on your business. I have the honor of moderating an in-depth discussion around the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Program and what's involved in the process of attaining certification. We have 5 key industry experts on the call today, all offering their feedback and guidance on a host of topics. Just before I get to the main session, I want to give you a brief overview on who we are and our family of companies. Perry Johnson Registrars, or PJR, we were originally founded by Perry L. Johnson himself in 1994, and we've really been at the forefront of international certification and registration from the very beginning. We achieved our initial ANAB accreditation shortly after our creation in 1995, and then we started expanding, and our first venture into international business came in '99, where we expanded overseas to Japan and the Brazilian markets. PJLA, our laboratory accreditation business, that was also founded in 1999. And in the early 2000s, we continued expanding overseas to areas like Germany, Thailand, Spain, Italy, Canada, Latin America, etc. So during that time, PJR had also attained UCAS accreditation. And in more recent years, we continued expanding overseas in the UK and China. In 2005, that's when PJ&A was founded, and that's our healthcare technology company that specializes in telemedicine, virtual scribing services, and medical coding. In 2012, that's when PJR FSI was born as a result of the demand in the industry for third-party certification to many food safety and quality standards, such as GFSI. We're headquartered in Troy, Michigan, and we're truly a global company. So we define our services into 4 key areas to market: auditing and certification to accredited third-party standards like ISO 27001 as an example. Second-party auditing standards to schemes that we own as a certification body are recognized around the world, like GMP for good manufacturing practices, CMMC at this point, since it's not formally accredited. and other standards. We also do what's known as first-party assessment, which is customer-specific audits or supply chain assessments to many programs like quality, brand standards, food safety, environmental, even social accountability and responsibility. And then we also offer training to all of our solutions. The third-party standards that we have today are all standards we audit to that are accredited under ISO 17065 or 17021, which are the standards that govern us as certification bodies. As Amy mentioned, I have experience in, and our company works in virtually every industry sector there is, including production, aerospace, processing, distribution, personal care, and many others. We help companies to mitigate the risk within their business and their supply chain, and certainly protect their brand, as that's quite important. We've previously been recognized as the #1 reporting registrar in the Americas by the IAAR. And as Perry Johnson himself did over 30 years ago, we apply the principles of quality management and collaboration, as well as organizational excellence in all of our field and office activities. And we ensure that we, as a certification body, comply with the requirements that are set forth by the international standards organizations and accreditation bodies, like the CMMC AB, who's with us here today. We have over 1,000 auditors in 60 countries on the ground who understand not only the regulations of the countries and the schemes, but also the language and, equally important, the culture of those countries. So just very briefly here, this is a snapshot of just some of the incredible depth of management system standards and expertise that really started it all, and that we conduct assessments to around the world. We conduct these accredited audits across many of the schemes for not only information security and technology, but quality, environmental, and many others. So just talking a little bit about our accreditation now, because this is quite important. Our family of companies have a long-standing relationship that's recognized around the world with many of the scheme owners and accreditation bodies like CMMC AB today. And accreditation really gives our customers assurance that our family of companies operate under the rules of accreditation bodies and scheme owners, which help to regulate and maintain the highest quality of our work. On many occasions, we partner with these groups like we're doing today and industry experts to ensure that we receive the most up-to-date information that we can then pass along to you, our customers and industry. So typically, if you think about it, where we as a certification body come and audit our customers, accreditation bodies come and audit us. It's typically a very large investment that's made every year on behalf of our company. But at the end of the day, we believe it's really worth it because it gives our customers confidence around the world they're partnering with a recognized certification body. So that's it for me now. At this point, I have the pleasure of moving to our introductions here for our panel. It's absolutely my pleasure to have such a group of experts and executives here on our call with us today. They're all very well known in the industry, and they're going to be sharing with us some of their experience and expertise today. So let me just first start by introducing our speakers. Terry Boboige is our president of Perry Johnson Registrars. He's been with the company since its initial accreditation in '95. Terry oversees the company's international operations across multiple entities. He has graduated undergrad while working in manufacturing at the Ford Motor Company and earned his MBA after transitioning from automotive manufacturing to business development at 3M. Terry then later returned to Ford and quickly advanced in the organization. In '95, Terry joined PJR and our family of companies. He has been responsible for and extended our scope of operations to include many, many standards, such as QMS for quality, EH&S for environmental health and safety, responsible recycling, cyber and information security, aerospace and food safety. His drive to grow PJR played a major role in its success, our client satisfaction, and our growth in over 20 countries and 6 continents. Now I would like to introduce Chris Golden. Chris is a retired USAF colonel. He has cybersecurity experience with the Department of Defense, Wall Street, and now runs information security for Blue Cross Blue Shield. He holds an undergraduate degree in computer science from the University of Miami, as well as 2 graduate degrees. Additionally, he maintains various industry certifications such as CISSP and CISA or CISA, among others. He's currently on the board of directors for the CMMC AB accreditation body. Now I'll move over to Seth Rahman. Seth is the director in Cusara's advisory services practice in the Tyson's Corner office. Mr. Rahman has served on major risk and controls advisory assessments for major financial service clients, cloud service providers, and federal agencies. Seth has extensive experience performing Department of Defense 800-171 assessments, FISMA and FedRAMP advisory assessments, and regularly writes articles and speaks on legal and privacy around data security issues. Seth sits on the board of the Cloud Security Alliance, the Washington, D.C. chapter, and other startups. Lisa Sheldon is an experienced IT and cybersecurity professional with over 30 years of experience working for federal government contractors. Lisa graduated from SUNY, or the State University of New York, Polytechnic Institute with a Bachelor of Computer Science. While working for IAP Worldwide Services, Lisa held the role of Senior IT Director for 15 years and was responsible for the overall corporate IT environment. She is a Certified Information Systems Auditor, or CISA, and is currently the Chief Information Security Officer for IAP Worldwide Services. Now, last and certainly not least, John Laffey. John joined Perry Johnson in 2014. He's our Information Security Program Manager and is a certified ISO 27001, 20000, and 9001 lead auditor. John's been working in IT for over 10 years and has been focused on information security for the last 5. Prior to joining PJR, he had the experience as a network technician, system administrator, and a hosted service provider. On behalf of PJR, I want to thank all of our speakers and distinguished guests for joining us today. So at this point now, we're going to allow our speakers to just talk a little bit about themselves and their organization. Just before we do that, though, Terry, I would like at this point to ask you to speak on behalf of PJR and talk a little bit about the importance of our relationships with our guests today, CMMC AB, Cusara, and IAP Worldwide Services. So at that point, Terry, I'm just going to pause for a minute and I'll pass it over to you.
Well, thank you, Paul. We really appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody to the webinar today. And I do really want to put a kudos out to the panel. I really appreciate the breadth of knowledge that this panel brings to the table. And really, your time is extremely valuable, and we can't thank you enough. And when we do these types of webinars, we want to be able to have a roundtable discussion and bring the what's first and foremost to people's minds up. And I know there's going to be a lot of questions. There is a lot. This is a moving standard with things happening very dynamically, but you're only as good as your industry colleagues and partners. And we rely in every industry that we do, be it if it's food safety or aerospace, to be able to call on these particular people, collaborate with them, put together best practices, and that's the whole idea. So with that said, again, I want to thank them, and let's move right on.
Okay, that's great, Terry. Thank you very much. So at this point, Chris, I would like to ask you to please tell us a little bit more about yourself and the CMMC AB. We have many people on our call today who are very interested and would love to hear a little bit more about the CMMC AB in general, as well as an overview of you and your role.
Sure, happy to be here. I greatly appreciate the invitation. I think most of us that sit on the board think our #1 job right now is sort of get the word out. People do have a lot of questions, so we're trying really hard to get all that done. So thanks for the introduction. I think you covered most of the important things sort of about my background. I will talk a little about sort of my involvement with the accreditation body. The DoD released an RFI, or a request for information, about a year ago, October last year, saying that they wanted to do this CMMC thing, but they really didn't know what to do or how to do it. And so a number of us, myself included, submitted white papers to the Department of Defense saying, well, if I was going to do it, here's how I would do it. And they sort of took all those together and came up with an industry day that was held down in DC. And so a bunch of us got together and met down there. The DoD came in and told us they wanted to do it, but they didn't really want to hold the reins. They wanted a nonprofit industry formed organization to do it. And so they left, and we sort of started self-organizing. And over time, we formed working groups, and those working groups did a number of different things on all of our different lines of effort. And then those working group leads sort of formed committee leads, and then eventually we formed a board and incorporated in the state of Maryland. And then we've been doing sort of really good work, hopefully, ever since. So that's sort of my involvement with the CMMC accreditation body. Just a real quick thing there on the slide. If you look at it, we're going to execute the program for the Department of Defense. So that's probably a pretty important thing to remember, is we are not part of the government, and we are not part of the Department of Defense. We're an independent nonprofit accreditation body that they have asked to run the program for them. And so we are currently sort of going through all the C3 PAOs that have said they want to be in the program, and we've trained about 60 or 70 assessors so far to go out and actually do assessments, and those people will actually do the assessments at a defense contractor. So the CMMC AB will not be doing that directly. We will have people that are trained to go do that independently, and the agreements between the C3 PAOs and the assessors and the defense contractor are between them. We're not going to get involved in those kind of things, but we're going to make sure the training is right and the quality is right for the assessors. We'll talk more as we go on, but I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk today.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. I think you wanted to speak for a moment here about the various levels and some information here.
Yeah, so people have sort of wondered what the model is, the cybersecurity maturity model certification. The second M there is model, and this is basically what it is. If you haven't seen it, you can Google it and get it right off the Department of Defense website or our website, which is cmmcab.org. But you can see there for companies that are basically starting out and have what's called FCI, or Federal Contract Information. Level 1 is probably what you want to do. It's called basic cyber hygiene, and you are actually just performing the things you need to do. And then as we move up the chain all the way up to 5, level 5, it becomes a little bit more harder to, do the process maturity side of the house, as well as more controls are laid in as you move up the chain. And you don't really hit what we call CUI, or controlled but unclassified information, until you get to level 3. And so if you routinely deal with FOUO and those kind of things that are going away and being replaced by CUI, you'll need to be at level 3, which again is a little bit harder to achieve, more controls in terms of practices, and then a much more nuanced maturity in terms of being able to manage what you do those things. But that's the model right there in a nutshell. Happy to answer questions about it as we move on, but a lot of people usually have questions about what the model actually looks like, and there it is.
That's great. Thank you very much, Chris. So at this point, I'd like to move over to Seth from Kuzara. Seth, Kuzara is a very well-respected organization, and certainly yourself as well, very knowledgeable about the many facets of cybersecurity. So I'd like to ask you, Seth, just to give us a bit of an overview of your company as well as yourself, please.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate Perry Johnson Registrars hosting this webinar and inviting folks like us to, be able to provide awareness and overviews of our companies, but also, more importantly, communicate information that we know about related to CMMC certification. I've been in the cyber security business for a little bit over 20 years, not to date myself. Started in the Air Force MCI backbone engineering team, and really focused on a variety of things related to federal security compliance. What Kuzara specifically focuses on is two things. If you take away things from this slide, is we have a business focused on helping customers think through some of the thorny issues around how do I architect for the best yield for compliance? What architecture patterns do I need to put in place? How do I isolate CUI data? What is the best way to prepare? Well, how do we leverage the cloud? What's the best model for securing and encrypting data? So we're very involved in that space. The other part of our business is a managed security business. And in that managed security business, we're essentially a MSSP, where we are based in Washington. We are a US citizen-only ITAR security operations center. And in that model, what we're doing is providing customers the ability to inherit security controls and to be able to, meet some of their requirements. Now, Kuzara has intentions of becoming a registered provider organization. Our application sits with the CMMC AB at the moment. I think they're going to release some information very imminently. The process for registered professionals has already started, so we're excited to be a part of that. A little bit more just in general is that CMMC, as you pointed out, is an evolving standard. There are many things that are going to change as we learn more in the provisional assessment process. Chris will talk more about that, I'm sure. But in a nutshell, our overall focus is to help customers prepare for CMMC, whether it's level 3 or level 1. So that's a nutshell there, Paul.
That's great, Seth. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that, and we certainly appreciate your time. Now let's move over to Lisa from IAP Worldwide Services. Lisa, would you mind please giving us a little bit of an overview of yourself and your company, and we thank you for being on today as well.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate the opportunity to join the discussion about CMMC. It certainly is an important initiative to the government contracting community. And IAP is government contractor. Company has been around for about 65 years, dating back to early 50s when Pan Am World Airlines created the company Pan Am World Services to support the Eastern Test Range rocket launches. Company has grown in size and services, over the many years, and our business units now are national security solutions. We provide support to highly classified projects. Just a few of the, we are one of a few companies that have the capability to do that. Our IT engineering solutions business focuses on 3 lines of business, mostly around IT, systems and support services, cyber and network operations, and engineering solutions. Our GSS group, or Global Support Services, that's kind of the core where the company was founded, and they provide base operations support, air traffic management, power solutions, facilities management, and that is around the globe and many times in remote and austere environments. Our aviation services group provides logistics support to the DoD for a variety of aviation platforms. And G3 is our UK business unit, provides many of the same services as our other business units, only to the Department of Defense, Ministry of Defense and NATO. The next slide just kind of shows our global footprint. We're in 20 countries, 2,700 employees spread throughout those countries, and some of our key customers, Army, Navy, Air Force, and of course through G3, we also support Ministry of Defense and NATO. So that's just a quick snapshot of IAP.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate that. Now I would like to move over to John as John gives us an overview of the auditor qualifications. So John, I'm going to ask you to please step in and give us an overview. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. So yeah, as Paul mentioned, the assessor qualifications, as you see on the screen here, it's going to be a graduated basis. Everyone's going to need to start with what the CMMC AB is calling a certified professional. You can see there is some background requirements there, having experience in cybersecurity or another IT field. You need to go through the CMMC AB certified professional training, which is going to include an exam. And at that point, you become a certified professional and you are allowed to participate as a team member on level 1 assessments, is my understanding at this time. From there, to become a level 1 assessor, you're obviously going to have to go through the level 1 training and exam. And additionally, you're going to have to be observed by a CMMC AB appointed member during your first assessment to make sure that you're carrying that out to their desires. At which point you could be credentialed and be allowed to lead level 1 assessments. Excuse me. The next level is for maturity level 3 assessors. And again, you obviously have to have your certified professional and certified level 1 assessor credential. You'll go through another round of training with another exam. You can see there's a little bit more stringent background requirements at level 3. And again, you're going to have to be observed during your level 3 assessment by a CMMC AB appointed professional to make sure you're carrying that out to their liking. Next slide, please. At level 5, again, it's following the same path. There'd be more training. I believe at this point, there's also a more stringent background check. I believe you actually have to have security clearance starting with level 3. And again, another exam and another observation. Currently, there's training being developed by licensed publishing partners, which is what the CMMC AB is titling those folks. There's another group called licensed training partners who will actually be providing that training. And from the most recent timelines I've seen, we're hoping that that training is going to be available in early to middle of 2021.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, John. I know that we're going to hear more from you coming up soon. So now, without further ado, let's get started with our roundtable portion of the session. I will be asking each of our speakers a series of questions today. And when this is complete, at that point, we will move on to our audience Q&A at the end. So please do remember to post any questions that you have for any of our speakers in the question box that Amy showed you at the very beginning. So let's get started. I'm going to pose my first question to you, Lisa, if I may. How has CMMC or other current cybersecurity standards altered your company's day-to-day activities? And if so, what has been the impact on your productivity?
Sure, Paul. Security controls absolutely have an impact on, what we do and how we do it. I believe one of the most positive aspects, of course, other than protecting the company and the customer's data, is a heightened awareness of security by the overall workforce. As we continue to educate our employees, they see the benefits of security, and not only from a business perspective, but also from a personal perspective. The employees are applying security training at home. And we've seen through our training, reporting of phishing emails is increased substantially, and it continues to rise. Now, of course, it doesn't always mean that, our users are happy about it, but it does help with the understanding of why the controls are implemented. Day-to-day activities are certainly impacted. We have strict limitations on websites allowed, external storage lockdown, MFA, email filtering, all of these things that kind of prevent employees from maybe doing what they do, what they have done in the past, or make them do it differently. So we try to minimize the impact, and we take a close look at what we're doing, why we're doing it, and of course, how we go about doing it. And in doing that, we look to find a balance between security and productivity for our end users. Sometimes the productivity impact occurs during the learning curve, folks getting used to multi-factor authentication, for example. In the beginning, we had tons of complaints, but over time, people got used to it. It became a smoother transaction, and that impact is reduced. So sometimes that productivity impact is a blip, and then it goes away. In our environment, I believe the biggest impact to productivity really has been within the IT department. As we've continued to lock down access to servers, especially around privileged access, we've added multiple levels of MFA. We've reduced access to and from servers. And work that was fairly simple in the past became a bit more complex and time consuming. So, and then adding tools on top of that need to be managed and monitored. So, as that environment and the tools evolve and they become more complex, it's important to really assess the impact to IT and evaluate the resources needed to manage that new normal. There's more to do on the IT side. And productivity on the end user side seems to wane over time.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's so critical, the information that you just presented, and we certainly appreciate that response. Terry, I would like to come back to you now. I know Perry Johnson Registrars, we're a global company and has really been at the start of certification since the very beginning in the Americas. But can you help us understand why you feel PJR is qualified to offer certification services in this unique arena?
Sure, Paul. In fact, PGR's history, as you mentioned earlier, we're recognized as obviously a top registrar in the field of quality assurance. We've obviously had a foundation in many scopes. Our scopes are pretty diverse, delivering to third-party auditing services. Typically we work in the manufacturing and service fields, but one of the big drivers that really is propelling us, obviously, has a lot to do with our size and our clients. We've got over 15,000 clients worldwide, okay? And then when we started in the earlier history, automotive and aerospace, medical device, big drivers of that. But then, we decided because of the strong growth to get into ISO 27001, probably it's been, roughly 12 or 13 years ago. But now with, the advent of GDPR, the EU requirements, it just makes sense for us to be able to get into this industry in a big way. We've been doing it. So we've got significant expertise in it. Obviously, we're always continuing to grow. But one of the things that positions us the most, I think, happens to be the foundation on how our company operates. And that we have to operate under some pretty heavy documents. 1702, it's called ISO IEC because we're members of the International Accreditation Forum. They have a document called 17021-1, 2015. And what this is, it's a document that we are regulated and held up against. And it's for conformity assessment body requirements. And this basically ensures our compliance, to these worldwide standards that we're recognized to. But in addition to that, early on when the company was first developed back in the mid 90s, we had to get on the GSA. That was one thing that was really, really critical. And we have a lot of top government clients ourselves. So those are the factors. Our existing customers are having the experience with the GSA. And I'm really looking forward to this because we've got a really strong history with our company, with our management team and the longevity of people that we have in the management staff and our staff doing that. And that tends to lend to really good practices when you don't have a turnover, when you have a solid core group that can go at the standards and do all the preparedness and things that you need to do. So really looking forward to it, Paul.
That's good. Well, thank you very much for that, Terry. I certainly appreciate that perspective. Chris, back to you now. What do you feel companies should be doing to get ready for CMMC now, and why do companies need to worry about the rollout of CMMC, excuse me?
Sure, yeah, so I'll answer that, I guess, in two different sizes. The first one, what should you be doing now? Most defense contractors have a couple different clauses in their contract. One is probably just a basic DFARS clause, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation, that says it's probably 7012 or something close to that, that basically says here are some basic cyber hygiene things you should be doing as part of your contract work for the government. We have mapped that to level 1 of the CMMC model. So if you have a requirement to follow those DFARS clauses for cybersecurity and you're doing those, you're going to be in a really great position to complete a CMMC Level 1 assessment. The second group of things are based on NIST Special Publication 800 TAC 171, which basically are mapped to CMMC Level 3 requirements. And so if your contract says you should be currently doing NIST 171 and maybe be available for an audit from the folks from the DCMA, the Defense Contract Management Agency, do that stuff. And you'll be in a very good position to complete a CMMC Level 3 assessment. So those are the things I would say companies should be doing now as the program rolls out. Now, in terms of the why, the Department of Defense and the federal government estimate that we're losing about $600 billion, and that's with a B as in Bravo, dollars a year in intellectual property theft from our adversaries from the defense supply chain. If you happen to look at the United States' F-35 new 5th generation aircraft, and then you look at the Chinese J-31, they look almost exactly the same, and you have to ask yourself why. So if we are losing that amount of intellectual property, and under NIST 171, basically companies are self-attesting that they are in compliance with that, well, maybe that's not good enough. And so the DoD has asked the accreditation body to actually send assessors on site to take a look and see what you're doing. So that independent third-party arbiter looking at what you're doing and certifying whether you're doing it right or not is really what the Department of Defense is looking for to generally raise the game of cybersecurity throughout the defense and the industrial base.
That's great. Chris, you mentioned that NIST 171 was mapped to level 3. Is there a document or something that people can look at to see how you've mapped those against the various levels? I
don't think there's a specific document out there. I'm sure multiple organizations have created mappings. So you can probably just Google it and go find something that's really close. But basically, level 3 for the CMMC model is word for word from NIST 171 with the addition of 20 additional controls that we thought were important that were not covered in 171. And so we call those the deltas. They're different than 171, but again, there's only 20 of the 130 or so controls that you need to be in compliance with at level 3 that are different than 171, and those are called out in the model. So again, if you take a look at the model, it'll show you which ones are different from the 171 list.
Perfect. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Seth, since the majority of DIB businesses are small and really don't have dedicated IT or security personnel, what do you feel are some of the advantages or even challenges to utilizing an MSP or an MSSP?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for that. You know, I think before I get into the advantages and challenges, I think one important thing are for people to really understand and distinguish between, you know, a managed service provider and a managed security service provider. Oftentimes that's very commingled, and you know, there's a provider that wants to extend themselves into a security service, and if you look at the government, one of the things that's been really well done in the government for the last 20 years or so is really distinguishing the security function from, you know, a IT general function. That's going to be more and more important as more CISOs sit on the board. We think at Quasara that the DIB, whether it's a small, micro, or well-established business, they're all going to need to get some level of assistance, specifically from managed service providers and managed security service providers in the next 5 years or so. Basically, just to provide an overview, an MSSP is going to be providing you security monitoring and other capabilities, incident response capabilities that are part of these CMMC maturity model levels that Chris just talked about at the beginning of the call. And then a managed service provider is essentially a service provider that's going to be providing more hands-on IT services, hardware deployment, hands-on technical assistance, configuration, things you actually need. Both of these organizations, in my opinion, are going to provide a lot of cost savings, a high level of protection. You know, we're in a pool of a business where there's not a lot of people that actually know, you know, the controls and how to map those controls back to actual real life implementations. How do you configure systems to actually make this thing work and meet the practices? So bringing that expertise in is really going to help launch the program, in our opinion. Make sure that you're set up for vulnerability scanning, continuous monitoring, and those really important practices that are going to be make or break. The other thing that Chris touched briefly that I think is important for folks to know is that there is a DFARS interim rule that was introduced, you know, in the last month that has some serious impacts on your cybersecurity in the short term, meaning that you have to, if you have certain clauses on your contract, you're supposed to go and meet 800-171 today. You don't necessarily are going to need to wait for CMMC to be deployed, you know, across the next 5 years. You actually need to do things now, which could include things like securing your networks, applications, databases. So partnering with an MSSP or an MSP is likely going to be a really important business decision. Obviously, cost is a big concern, you know, and all of that. But there's and really choosing your MSP and your MSSP wisely is going to be a really important thing as well, I think, because you know there's going to be a lot of folks trying to do this, and you know choosing your partners and you know doing due diligence on their security controls, their experience in federal, their clearances of their staff is going to be really important there, Paul.
That's great. Thank you, Seth. Critical information. I appreciate it. John, earlier you talked a little bit about qualification of assessors. If you look at it from a standard perspective, are there different requirements to assess different CMMC maturity levels?
Yeah, so going back, obviously, I touched on the different training and exams that are going to need to be passed. And again, this is a graduated system. So if you're a level 1 assessor, that means you've already completed the certified professional track. If you're a level 3 assessor, that means you've completed the certified professional and the CA1 assessor tracks. Additionally, so to become a certified professional, they're looking for two plus years in cyber information technology experience. Once you get to level 3, they're bumping that up to 4+ years of cyber informational technology experience. Additionally, to become a certified professional or a CA1 assessor, you have to go through a commercial background check. In order to conduct level 2 and higher assessments, you're going to have to go through a full security clearance background check. So it's going to be a more stringent process. Obviously, the CMMC AB is concerned with the folks that are going to be conducting these assessments, as they're going to have access to sensitive information, and we're going to need to make sure that everything is staying confidential as it needs to be, and not getting in front of the eyes of someone who maybe has bad intentions for it. So those are the main differences as you ramp up on the maturity levels for the assessment requirements.
Great, thanks, John. Terry, I want to come back to you for a moment. As a certification body and the leader of ours, what have you and your teams been doing to prepare for CMMC certification and servicing your clients?
Well, there's a level of excitement, Paul, that comes with entering a new program, and the staff obviously has to want to do this, has to be excited, has to be motivated. So a part of it is getting our internal processes together. So you have to do certain things. First, there's a series of steps you do when you get into any kind of a program. Obviously, you have to identify the internal cybersecurity auditor competencies. That's really important, and John has talked about that, to determine what your team is and what you need to have in terms of personnel. There's the whole setting up of the entire infrastructure of the way this whole program is going to work, developing the work product. Like, you have to be able to develop the client intake questionnaire. You have to obviously have a proposal that the client is clearly read, can look at, is simple, they understand what their deliverable is and what they're going to receive. And behind the scenes, obviously, we have a whole team of people that have to work on developing our website. We want to be able to make sure that in real time that they can look at FAQs, frequently asked questions with Q&A, especially since this thing is dynamic and it is moving and it is changing. You have to develop your audit working documents. But as Seth said, the big priority has been for us just recently is the DoD interim rule, where suppliers have to do that self-assessment. So PGR has a self-assessment preparedness program, readiness review, an audit tool, for the NIST MEP cybersecurity DFARS requirements. And that's the 120-point self-assessment. So we have that tool available to be able to help our clients. We've been getting phone calls actually asking about that, which is very promising. So it's in essence a gap. But we got to work on, like, for instance, behind the scenes, as a company like ours, I have to ensure as the leader of our company that we have a particular contractual language for our clients, so they understand when they're entering into an agreement with us. We have to have our internal staff and our auditor confidentiality documents that are prepared. This is something that we do with all of our programs, but it's extra important in the cybersecurity space. So our internal procedures obviously they're being developed as the program changes, and the whole goal is really is to be able to deliver the highest quality program. We want to be well recognized for this, especially with our client base that we have, with being on the GSA. So it's important that we really deliver a high quality product, and myself in a leadership role, it's important that I impart that to our entire staff. So
that's great, Terry. Thank you. I mean, it's absolutely critical when you look at it from people, process, and infrastructure. If we don't have that in place and locked down, we're not going to be able to deliver our best to our customers. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. Okay, so now Lisa, back to you. Has there been any resistance to the implementation of new cyber standards? And if so, how have you navigated those difficulties?
Yeah, Paul, absolutely. Resistance always comes with change, no matter what that change might be. And with this, we get it from the executive side and from the end user side. So executives look at it as, wow, this is more money I have to spend. And of course, end users are like, now what? Now what am I going to have to change? So one of the first things that we've tried to do is educate both sides, and get them to understand, what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and really what it means to the business. We want to make sure that everyone understands the impact of non-compliance. And it's not an option, it's something that we have to do. So it really comes down to non-compliance will impact revenue, right? And that gets the leader's attention. And then, of course, if revenue is impacted, well, that's going to impact jobs, and that gets the employee's attention. So they understand that this is important. We have to do it. It's not just something, you know, Lisa wants to do. It's being driven by our customer. So luckily for us, 5-6 years ago, our executive team, you know, recognized the need for enhanced security based on increased threats. And it was becoming more and more prevalent and more obvious that we needed to do more to protect the company's data and, in turn, the customer's data. So that put us a little bit ahead on the NIST and CMMC curve. The second thing that we try to focus on is transparency and communication. You know, no one likes the unknown. So before we implement any new solutions, we make sure we inform our workforce. You know, we tell them what we're doing, why we're doing it, and help them understand how it's going to impact their day-to-day operations. You know, no surprises. Or, you know, we at least like to minimize them. So then we give our workforce opportunity to voice concerns, and we do our best to implement the security controls with the minimal impact. You know, there's no point in having such a secure environment that our employees can't deliver on the mission. There needs to be balance. Sometimes an impact can't be avoided. And when that happens, you know, we work very closely with internal customers and we find other solutions. Sometimes it's as simple as, you know, possibly revising a process or educating them on, you know, alternative ways to accomplish the same task. And, you know, maybe it's tweaking that security solution where we still meet the need for security, but we make it a little easier on the end users. You know, a good example of this is, you know, when we told our workforce that we're going to be locking down the use of external storage, blocking, you know, no more thumb drives, no more USB drives. They were not happy, but we got out in front of it. We met with the leaders, we met with, you know, and sent the message down, and we gave them an opportunity to come back to us and tell us, well, wait a minute, I have some, you know, this critical piece of my job, I need to do this. And when we came up with those, we worked together and found alternative solutions so that we can meet both needs. So I think it's really just, you know, the best way to navigate through is being transparent and working with the end users and finding common ground.
Thank you, Lisa. It's, you know, I've seen it time and time again in multiple industries. It's great to hear how IAP is directly managing that. You said something that really hit home to me, and this is relevant, I believe, in every industry, is what's the impact of non-compliance? It's not only revenue, but it's also brand. And, you know, that is so important. So I really appreciate that. Now, back to you, Seth. What CMMC requirements will a MSSP address, and what other tools or resources do you think we should be considering?
Thanks for that. I mean, you know, one of the things that folks on the call should look at is the CMMC guide that's been out there published since the end of January that really lays out CMMC requirements and practices for all the various levels of CMMC from level 1 through 5, but really focusing on level 1 and level 3. Because it gives you a broad perspective on the maturity of your organization, depending on whether you're a level 1 or you intend to be a level 3. We think very few organizations are going to be selected or not at all for level 2 at the moment. But the real requirements that really start trickling in, starting at level 2, if you were to think about it theoretically, are focused on good security hygiene. And the way to get that, building on what Lisa was saying, is really focused on a cultural shift in the way people think about day-to-day work. And that starts with security hygiene at every level of the organization, right? So an MSSP will come in and provide tools to make that shift, you know, from things like multi-factor authentication, or more specifically, like we do in our, because our cyber court service is we provide a managed security monitoring. So there are requirements. There's about 40 requirements, practices at level 3 that deal specifically with some level of vulnerability management, security monitoring, responding to incidents. And in my opinion, you know, one of the first calls that I had with a prospect on CMMC early last year was a steel company who will go unnamed, who said, we regularly receive blueprints from the Navy and, you know, about vessels and things like that, but we don't actually know what they mean by vulnerability management. And it really was alarming. And since then, you know, I've talked to about 100 or so different companies that are in the DIB. And it's not a small company problem where, you know, you might have a small company, even the very large companies struggle with implementing security monitoring and incident response. So it's going to be an area where an MSSP can come in and help customers think through, you know, phases of work perhaps on how to think through this, right? What assets do you have? How many of them belong in maybe the category of a Windows machine? How many are Macs? How do you install the data sources? What data sources do you need to monitor? Not all data sources are important. How do you make sure the right data sources are picked so you can meet those CMMC practices dealing with auditing and accountability? And then once you collect the data sources, how do you make sure that you have the right rules built to react and create incidents for those? What's your ticketing system going to be? How are those ticketing systems going to be secure to the right individuals? Are you going to have multi-factor authentication? One of the really important things is, you know, from our perspective as an MSSP, we're going to go through the same motions as everyone else on this call to go get certified through the AB and the DoD, you know, at level 3 or level 4 and 5 at future dates, and really start to focus on the tools and resources that we use, that we bring to our customers. So the whole idea behind an MSSP is how to take advanced positions on VON management, which is vulnerability management, things like scanning, compliance scanning, perimeter scanning, looking for open ports and protocols, and bringing those tools and resources to customers so that we can meet those CMMC requirements on their behalf, and so that they can then document that in their system security plans for you know, provisional assessors and then down the road C3PAOs to look at and evaluate and you know, provide certification again. So the overall role of an MSSP and the tooling is going to be a broad set of technologies that are all really focused on meeting the CMMC practices and a little bit more.
Thank you, Seth. That's appreciated. John, back to you now. We've heard about qualification, we've heard about CMMC levels, but from a training perspective, when is the assessor training expected to be available to the wider group, and who is going to be providing the training?
Thank you, Paul. So right now, with the timeline that the CMMC AB has laid out, it looks like that the training material is hopefully being finalized right now. And the rollout schedule is showing training to become available in winter, you know, Q4 of this year, Q1 of next year. The training materials are actually being developed by what the AB is calling licensed partner publishers. And these are organizations who've actually gone through the process of applying to the AB to become a creator of training materials. They've had to pass certain background requirements as far as how many hours of coursework and curriculum they've published in technology, you know, client references, 2 years of publishing history, different things like that. So those folks right now are creating the curriculum that is ultimately going to be rolled out for the training of the assessors, and it's actually going to be provided by licensed training providers, which is another designation the AB has created. And those are going to be groups of people who specialize in training. It could be universities or things of that nature, who have the facilities and the staff, who will ultimately be trained by master assessors provided by the AB. They'll roll that training out, and hopefully that ecosystem will start being available to hopeful assessors like myself early next year. and we can get through that and start rolling out the assessments Q2 of 21.
That's great, John. Thank you very much for that. I know of a few people even on our call today that are interested to hear about that, so thank you. Okay, Chris, I want to circle back to you for a moment. We talked a lot about you know, the CMMC program and the levels, but you know, based on the timelines, when should companies start to implement CMMC?
Yeah, that's a good question. We hear that a lot. John's pretty close. We expect the Department of Defense to start issuing RFIs, or requests for information, with CMMC requirements here probably within the next 2 to 3 months, something like that. You know, certainly before the end of the year, maybe. Again, those are just RFIs. Those RFIs will eventually turn into RFPs, requests for proposals, with CMMC certification requirements. And then as of right now, the Department of Defense will not be giving you the award of the contract unless you've met your CMMC certification criteria. So it would be due by the time of award of the contract. I think most of us agree that over time, as more and more companies become CMMC certified, that will move back to the bid portion of the process. You won't be allowed to bid on those until you're CMMC certified, but that probably won't happen until 2025, 2026, something like that, when we've got our good hands around the vast majority of the defense contractors who need this kind of stuff. So again, I would say right now there's going to be very few in the low hundreds probably number that will need to be CMMC certified by, let's say, Q1 of next year, but that's going to grow over time. So if you think you're going to be bidding on any of those contracts that are going to come out as RFIs and RFPs, and I apologize, I don't have any insight as to which contracts will and will not have those. That's a DoD decision. But you know, keep your eyes on it, and if you see it, you know, start working on that lane to get there. Again, if you have a DFARS cybersecurity clause, that would be equivalent to level 1, or a NIST 171 clause in your contract, that would be basically equivalent to a level 3. Please do that stuff, and the more you do on that lane, the less you'll have to do on the CMMC side.
Thank you, Chris. I have just a quick follow-up question to that. With the self-assessment, you know, the date is November of this year. Do you personally have any concern with companies being able to meet that timeline?
No, we don't. Obviously, if you have been at testing that you are compliant with either the DFARS clause or the NIST 171 clause, it will be very apparent in the assessment that's actually the true case. If you have not been real honest with the government at that point, well, that's a different discussion between you and the government. But yeah, I think most of the requirements are going to be at level 1. The vast majority of companies will be only at level 1. So of the 350 or so thousand companies we're probably going to be looking at, it's probably north of 300,000 that will only ever be level 1, and those are 16 controls, a basic cyber hygiene, and no maturity processes. And so we don't think that's a very large bar to get over.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that. Terry, coming back now, I have another question for you, and I believe that it's a consistent issue that you know, countless companies face in almost every industry, and Lisa even touched on it a little bit earlier as well. But conformance to new standards generally means a monetary investment on behalf of the organization. Sometimes it's very substantial investments. Can you speak to this for a moment and perhaps offer some guidance on how our audience today could go to top leadership and work on getting their support and approval of the program?
Sure, Paul. You know, it's really a push-pull, and it's been ever present with our company in dealing with prospective clients who often want to come in, they want to get a proposal on how much it's going to cost, and they get pressure from top management. Top management says, listen, we need to have it. We need to have it now. We need to meet the bid requirement. We got to be able to do this, okay? So often not really understanding the impact that it has on the staff and the management representative and the person that has to really spearhead and do all these things. And we've talked about this a little earlier, and some of those points are so true. So really, the voice of that IT person or that management rep that's got to do everything and get all these groups of people together, it's a tough job. It's not just one person. And, you know, they're granted the responsibility sometimes, but they don't have the authority. And that's sometimes the concern. So you got to have the right person in that slot. And Lisa sounds like she's doing an amazing job with her organization. But if you don't have that person that's a driver that has to go back to top management and say, listen, this is what's going to happen if we don't do this. We will lose this bid. We can engender issues or escapes that our company's going to have. This is a brand protection issue, like you mentioned, Paul. this will hurt our brand. But sometimes the executives don't see that. So it's a never-ending battle. And so in today's world, our IT leaders and managers, they need to be political. They almost got to have, be schooled in persuasiveness. And so it's a different skill set that you almost have to bring to the table to be able to get this accomplished with top management. And in the end, hopefully management will understand the necessary needs, but it's still going to be a challenge. I can tell you that. It will be. It will always be an ever-present challenge.
All right, thank you, Terry. I as I mentioned, I know countless people across almost every industry that face that exact issue. So getting executive support is key. And if there's anything that we can do to help support that message, then please do reach out to us. Okay, Lisa, coming back to you now. As an organization, what have you been doing to prepare for CMMC certification? And in your opinion, how do you think CMMC is different than, say, ISO 27001?
And thanks, Paul. And just before I get into that, I just want to say I agree 100% with what Terry said. We have to become salesmen, and get the executives to understand and make that investment. And it is becoming a huge part of the job. But that aside, both Chris and Seth have mentioned NIST 800-171, and I believe the requirement for that was December of 17. So our journey to become CMMC compliant really started back then when we had to become NIST compliant. And we've been working, really on it ever since probably 2016. So I'll kind of just talk through some of the steps, some of the things that we did over time. And one of the very first things is defining the scope. And, as you know, both the ISO standard and CMMC both have a requirement for scope, but where they're a little bit different is with ISO 27001, you define the scope, the boundaries, and objectives for your ISMS. With CMMC, you're pretty much told what the scope is, and that is your CUI environment. So CMMC is all about protecting CUI. So what we did was we looked at our overall environment, we looked at our CUI, where it resided, and we worked hard to reduce that overall footprint so we could reduce the scope of for CMMC. So we narrowed it down to a very small subset of our overall IT environment. And then next step was clearly and thoroughly documenting that environment. We created diagrams and showed data flow, to and from that CU environment, and anything that contained or processed CUI was included. So that way we had a very clear picture of where CUI existed within our environment, and that defined where we needed to apply all of the either NIST 800-171 or CMMC controls. And then once we had that scope clearly defined, we went to work on the controls. And this is an area that CMMC and ISO are a little bit different. Although they have overlapping controls and they're really all about cybersecurity and protecting data, where they differ a little bit is CMMC is much more prescriptive in the requirement. As an example, CMMC clearly states that you will use MFA for local and network access to privileged accounts. You don't see that level of detail in the ISO standard. They tell you you have to protect your data, you have to have access control. They don't go down to that level of detail. The ISO control objectives are more general. They leave room for the company to define the control based on the risk assessment. So one of the things that's really important to understand the full intent of that CMMC or NIST control, to make sure that you understand it so you're implementing and meeting that requirement. From there, we went to the writing of the system security plan. And for each requirement, we clearly spelled out what we were doing to meet that requirement, all while keeping that scope in mind, because you don't want your SSP to kind of sprawl and cover things that are not in that scope. You want to keep CMMC kind of in a bucket. So then that helps from an audit perspective too, so that when the auditors come in, and we recently went through the DCMA, DIBCAC, NIST 800-171 audit, and the very first thing they did was a thorough review of our SSP and our control environment, and that's where they focus their audit questions. So the better you scope it, the tighter you can control what those auditors are looking at. And just to touch on CUI for a minute, I'll be honest, one of the most difficult parts of this for us was identifying the CUI. Everyone seemed to have a little bit of a different idea of what qualified as CUI. We even went back to contracting officers and asked their opinions. And it varied greatly between contracting officers. So get a handle on your CUI, make sure you understand where it is, who's accessing it, how it's being created, how it's being transmitted. All of that is so key to implementing the controls properly. And one of the final things that I thought was really important was we had a third party come in and conduct an audit. I think regardless of how prepared you are, or an external auditor is going to find something. It could be some clarification in SSP, a missing artifact, or even a misinterpretation of one of the controls. I know when we did this, one of the controls, we thought we had it nailed down perfectly. And when the auditor looked at it, they had a very different thought about what the requirement was really asking. So that was one that we were able to tweak. And when we went to the final audit with DIBCAC, I was glad that we had that auditor because they were spot on, and the changes we made helped with that assessment. So CUI is just so key. Know where it is and know what you're doing to protect it.
That's great, Lisa. Thank you. Several of your points are really key, and although the CMMC program is fairly new, I've already received a lot of questions from various groups around that. So I certainly appreciate you clarifying. And in relation to CUI, thank you for the great segue. With that, I'd like to come back to Seth. I have one final question for you. In preparing for a CMMC certification and for companies that have FCI and a CUI data, what recommendations or procedures do you suggest to them for managing and securing that data?
Thanks, Paul. I'd probably tell them to call Lisa first. She's got the great tactical model for really what we tell our customers almost on every one of these calls where we're being asked on what the best way to prepare would be. I mean, if you already have the DFAR 7012 clause, or if you know that you're going to be subject to the new interim 7019, 7020, which is going to make you submit a self-assessment and score yourself, you either have at the very minimum some federal contract information or CUI. Our first step always is to tell customers to map their CUI or even their FCI. Where are you getting it from? And that's really where the challenges are. The customers don't really know where that stuff is, and they also don't really understand how it was labeled by the government. Some places there is clear labeling, some places there are not. So to Lisa's example, there's a ton of work that's done up front in trying to figure out where this thing is, right? It's almost akin to, PII, PHI, discovery in terms of your, CUI data. Where's it coming from? I mean, we have a simple model from a perspective of NIST. Where do things get transmitted? Where do things get processed? And where do they get stored, right? If there is a good, reasonable, good faith effort to figure out where all that data flow actually touches the organization, you can either make a couple of decisions at that point. Are we going to descope where it's at today and maybe move things to the cloud maybe get them in a enclave to process this data, or are we going to keep things where they're at and implement those controls? So our really, first step is to try to do the data mapping. It's a little bit easier if you are a small or micro and you have a little bit of a smaller footprint and you can easily determine that, but it becomes a harder and harder problem the larger the company is and the more footprint of systems. I recently talked to a company that said they had 500 different applications, and it was hard for them to figure out where this thing was at. So building on that, once the data is at least identified, the thing that you really have to think about is how are you going to organize these system security plans? What is your, so we do a lot of work in the FedRAMP space from an advisory perspective. And even in the NIST system security, the concept of the authorization boundary is really not alien to this exercise here. You really have to create your CUI boundary, your CUI enclave. Where is your organization storing, processing, and transmitting the data? And really focus on that. Try to organize your system security plans based on that, discrete sets of siloed information. Make sure you're clear on how you implement that. A great point that Lisa made was the implementation, interpretation of controls. I think that's going to be a huge area of contention in the next year. The CMMC AB is trying to do a great job with the provisional assessor training, trying to get people on a level playing field. But it's going to be a lot of confusion in that space because it's subjective, right? So, but getting that right up front, as much as you can, is really critical. And I think that's a great place to start. Once you have an idea of where those things are going to be, it would be time to then move on and really try to lock those practices in and figure out where your implementation is going to be, and then you can move into documentation. We never tell our customers, who have a great tendency, by the way, to just start documenting, give us the policy, give us the template. We always try to, put the slow motion on because we really, really want to get the scoping and the CUI boundary correct up front. Back to you, Paul.
Great, thank you very much, Seth. I appreciate that. Certainly great detail. Okay, I have one final question here for Chris. Chris, there have been some rumors that inspection bodies might play a critical part in the CMMC process. Do you have any guidance or input for us on that?
I do not, unfortunately. It's still sort of up in the air exactly how all the ISO requirements that are going to be levied on us from the DoD are going to sort of flow down into other organizations. So unfortunately, I do not have a good answer to that, and I apologize. But going back to what Seth just talked about, I think we're going to see a lot of companies sort of follow the PCI model, if you're familiar with PCI DSS, where they're going to absolutely do everything they can to limit the systems that they have CUI on, and therefore limit the scope of the assessment. But on your first question, I apologize. I just don't know yet. We're waiting for DoD's guidance on how that's going to flow down.
No problem, no problem. I just thought I'd put you on the hot seat there for a minute. So, okay, well, listen, at this time, I want to thank Terry, Chris, Lisa, Seth, and John for their time. That brings us to our audience question and answer session, which I'm really looking forward to. I thank you all for letting me join in the session today. And at this point, I'm going to pass it back to Amy to moderate the rest. So back to you, Amy, and thank you again.
Yeah, some great discussion there, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. So if everyone attending, if you had any questions or points where you wanted some clarification, go ahead and get those questions in. Just really quick, I wanted to share with you all some of our upcoming webinars. The first one there, we do have the recording now available on our website for your review if you missed it. We also have another webinar happening just in a little while today, actually, with Joe Krolikowski on the interaction of processes. And then we also have an upcoming webinar regarding supply chain resiliency using data ecosystems, which should be very interesting to see. So get those questions in. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question panel to see what we've got here. All right. And I'm going to direct a couple of these questions to a specific speaker. However, if once that's been answered, someone else wants to chime in, please do feel free, all of our speakers. I have a question here from Mary Jo, and I do apologize in advance if I ever mispronounce anyone's name. And I think this one should probably go to Lisa. Lisa, Mary Jo's wondering how you can know if you possess CUI versus just FCI. Do you have any input on that?
That's actually a great question. And it seems to be the $64,000 question. It's hard to know. What we've done, we've gone back to our contracting officer and we've asked them for their input. And we've also reviewed our contracts, and based on the contracts and within our contracts anyway, we can see some of our seed roles have limited distribution where it may say, you know, government only. So we've made the assumption, and I do say that, you know, that was our assumption, that those seed role documents with limited distribution, we're going to consider them CUI, and other information we try to get the contracting officer to give us an answer.
All right, fantastic. There's another question here from Mary Jo, and I think, Steph, you might be able to answer this one. How can we identify what CUI we have?
Yeah, so there's many different types of CUI, right? So CUI, there's actually if you Google the DoD CUI registry, there's actually a very interesting and helpful site that was released by the Department of Defense, I think in the last 30 days, which actually lists out, you know, 24 categories of content and subcontent in there. There's really two kinds of CUI that are supposed to be, the two categories. One is the CUI basic, right, which is for baseline handling and dissemination controls. And then there's CUI specified. Depending on the type of business you are, you know, you'd have to pick from a list of CUI specified subsets. Those are things like, you know, we're dealing with critical infrastructure. We might be dealing with export control. We might be dealing with data related to nuclear or privacy data. So what we do is we try to categorize, as I said earlier, between the transmission, the processing, and the storage of data into buckets of where you might have specified, where you might have CUI basic. And then you really, because every company on the call today knows what they do for their customers. So it's at least important to be able to say, we know we have statistical data versus data, you know, for law enforcement, right? And so you categorize them and you understand what systems either store them, use them for common services, and process them, and you work through a data mapping process. You get real fancy later. You can make them into data flows and things like that. So that's sort of how I'd take a look at that.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Seth. Chris, I've got a bit of a long one here for you, so bear with me. If you need any clarification, we can always ask the submitter to clarify. Just some background. This is from Jay. Jay says, cybersecurity self-assessment forms have been submitted to suppliers by primes and OEMs for a while now. There's no defined requirement for formal CMMC registration, as most primes and OEMs are only expecting to flow down compliance with specific requirements and levels. What assumptions are being made that formal registration will be a flow down requirement to suppliers and sub-tiers of primes and OEMs?
I always appreciate getting the softballs when I do these kind of things. Right now, I don't think the DoD is going to have any specific flow downs. So let me sort of explain what I mean. Meaning if they give a contract to a Lockheed Martin or a General Dynamics or something like that as a prime at the level 3 or 4 or 5, that everybody in their sub world supporting that contract has to also be a level 3 or a level 4 or level 5. What we think is going to happen is that the DoD is going to issue the prime contract at a specific level, let's say level 3, and then inside the contract will be specific levels of work that are different. And so it may say that, you know, these top 10 things are all level 1, these 2 little things are level 4, and this one thing at level 5 or something like that. And so as the prime then makes the decision on who to go to, for those kind of things, or whether to keep that stuff in-house, they will have to meet those requirements, or the supplier that signs up for that specific work will need to meet that requirement. But we don't expect a general flow down where they say, okay, this is a level 4 contract, everybody, the prime and all the subs need to be level 4. We don't think it's going to be that way. We think it's going to be called out specifically in the contract via work streams for different levels of CMMC.
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much, Chris. Just a reminder, I'm seeing a couple questions pop in about slides in the recording. Those should both be available from the pgr.com website, usually within 24 to 48 hours of the webinar ending. All right, let's see. We've got a question here, kind of a compound question here for John and Terry from Stephen. Stephen asks, has PJR audited manufacturers to CMMC yet? What are companies audited to? PJR audits our company to ISO 9/AS9100 requirements. Are there majors/minors/OFIs? How do we pass or fail the audit? So John or Terry, whoever wants to speak up first, just go ahead and chime in.
Sure, Amy, I'll go first. So Stephen, currently we've not audited anyone to the CMMC standard. As I stated, we're still awaiting the training to become available so we can get our folks through that and make sure that we're assessing it in the proper way. And I would probably have to defer to Chris here as far as majors, minors, OFIs. Again, as I have not gone through the training yet, I'm not exactly sure what types of findings will result from these assessments. I don't know if it's just pass fail or if there's findings issue that remediation is expected from the client. So Chris, I hate to put you on the hot seat, but do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I do. So yeah, basically the standard is the standard. So it will be a pass fail kind of assessment. However, based on sort of how the company's doing overall, there will be a remediation period. Right now, we're debating whether it's going to be 60 or 90 days, probably leading towards 90 days, where you can address something. So let me give you an example. At CMMC Level 2, the maturity process is simply documented, right? So you have to perform at Level 1, you have to document at Level 2, and you have to manage at Level 3. So let's say you didn't have a policy. You needed a policy on access control and you did not have that at Level 2, you would fail the assessment, but that's a reasonable thing to ask for, and 90 days is plenty of time to create a policy to do that. We're going to require the same assessor to come back and verify that you have now met those new requirements within that period, but there will be the ability to do some things. They should be small and relatively inconsequential to the big picture. We're not going to say you need to have, let's say, a DLP solution. You did not have one, and we're going to give you 90 days to implement DLP. That's a little, far-fetched in anybody's mind, I think, both in time and scope and cost. But, for little things that you've sort of missed, we're not going to fail you for those kind of things. We're going to give you a chance to make those kind of corrections moving on, and it should be in the 60 to 90 day period after your assessment is completed, as long as it's done by the same assessor.
Gotcha. Okay, so depending on the nature of the issue, there'll be a chance for them to fix some things. Okay.
Correct.
Cool. Terry,
Right.
Yeah,
Terry, did you have any input on that, Terry?
No, I think that traditionally, I think a lot of folks are used to the process where, governed by 17021, where, the registrar would issue a nonconformance with the report, and the client typically goes through a corrective action process with the certification body or the person that does the actual audit. And then after that's all cleaned up, then it would go to like an executive committee or a second level of a decision. And so that process is different because, like Chris said, with pass or fail, our documents would then get uploaded and go directly over to CMMC. And then if there is a deficiency, like Chris would say, that you handling that, right, Chris, with the CMMC AB, you're going to handle that particular deficiency. And then you're going to get back to the auditor of question, right? Correct? That's typically how the flow is going to go?
I think the assessment team who works for a C3 PAO, not for the accreditation body, will notify us that there has been a failure, but with an opportunity for remediation, and we'll just sort of wait for the information to flow at that point. I don't think it's the accreditation body's job to sort of get involved in that until the decision is made by the assessor as to what they think, whether the homework that would need to be completed in the remediation period was done successfully or not. But we'll certainly be in the loop in terms of tracking it, but I don't see us getting involved in that decision making.
Okay, good.
All right, yeah, we've got some great questions coming in here, so please keep them coming. If you have any questions that maybe you don't feel comfortable asking live on the air, please do feel free to go to pjr.com. We have a full contact page. You can give us a call, send us an email, and if you're interested in CMMC services, we do have a way to request a free quote as well on our website. All right, we've got a question here for Seth. This one is from Eric. Eric asks, how can I best get started and what resources are available to prepare?
Well, I think the first resource I would point anyone to is to get familiar with, the CMMC information that was put out by the AB on their website, which is really an overview of all the practices, right? I mean, you need to get familiar with what are those specific practices or controls that need to be implemented. The second thing I would do is to look at your existing contracts and see where you have those specific contractual requirements to the DoD, whether it specifies that you have a contractual qual clause for DFAR 7012, which means you'll have to implement at least the CMMC Level 3. And so you need to be able to understand what your legal contractual obligations are, talk to your contracting officers, and really try to get a sense of what those things are. So I would say at the very baseline, you got to look at your contracts, you got to look at your practices and make sure that you have. The third thing is the overview of your environment, as we had talked earlier on the panel, which is to get a sense of the boundary of where CUI is. And going through that, could be a function of creating. There's some available templates that have been created by industry groups to create mappings of CUI. They're all not purpose built for anything, but they're general. You could take those, or you could look at the guidance for CUI scoping that's out there on the DoD website, on the NIST website, and essentially start scoping those. I think having that as a baseline really sets up a company to then think about where are they going to implement the controls, where are the practices going to go. And you will have a decision to make at some point. Are we going to implement these ourselves? Are we going to have to bring an additional third party to help us? Maybe they're a point-in-time provider to do a gap assessment. Maybe there's somebody who's going to help you on the advisory side of architecting a solution. Maybe it's a cloud service provider that's going to help you migrate some of those workloads for email or for infrastructure. Or it could be something more specific and specialized. So there's a couple of different ways to go about the problem, but we believe that everyone should start off with getting familiar with the practices and really looking at the boundary of your CUI. That's step 0 in our opinion.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Seth. We've got time for, I think, 1 or 2 more questions. So let me direct this one to Chris. This one's from Ralph. Ralph is asking, when will you be finalizing approved registration bodies to certify to CMMC?
So when you say registration bodies, I'm going to assume you mean C3 PAOs. If that's not the right answer, then we probably need to have a different discussion. But yeah, if the C3 PAOs are going through the process right now, all the ones that have raised their hand on the website to be in that lane, they're going through their background checks. We've had to make sure they're not a fly-by-night company, that they're American owned, et cetera, et cetera. So we're doing our due diligence. But those should be coming out in tranches of about 10 or 20 here over the next couple of weeks, I think. So once those C3POs are identified, there are a number of assessors that we have trained that will be affiliated with specific C3POs. In fact, we did that intentionally, so there would be a natural relationship there. And then we sort of have a bunch of utility infielders as assessors that are not affiliated with any C3PO that they can be used as augmentation as the workload sort of increases, which is certainly something I think we all expect. So that's the plan for the C3POs over the next short term.
All right, fantastic. Thanks so much, Chris. One more last question here. This is a bit of a 2-parter, but I'll turn it towards Paul first. This is from Turner. Turner asks, has there been any type of clarification on how CMMC related costs are to be considered allowable, or is there a plan for reimbursement yet?
Yeah, okay, great question. From our perspective, from a certification body's perspective in a C3 PAO, We will probably be following pricing very similar to our other information security schemes. That is our plan at this point. Chris, maybe I'm going to ask you to jump in here. I've heard a lot that there are potential reimbursement programs for companies that are implementing CMMC. Do you have any further insight on that, or areas where we can direct our listeners?
Yeah, I hate to do it, but that's really a DoD issue, not an AB issue. The DoD has said repeatedly that most of the cost to be compliant with CMMC will be an allowable cost in the contracts. I am not a contracting guy, so I don't want to lie to you, but I'm not sure exactly what that means. But I'm assuming depending on what kind of contract you have, you should be able to transfer that funding, line, into the contract to be reimbursed by the government. But again, it's a DoD decision on how they want to do it. We're really not too involved in that.
Okay, Lisa or Sep, do you have any input or thoughts on that?
I mean, I'll follow up with what Chris just said. I mean, we have heard repeatedly from the DoD that there is going to be some, allowable cost. There are some contract language out there that suggests that, there's reimbursements available, but we're talking, I think less than 3,000 or 6,000 from what I recall. Don't quote me on that, but that's what I had seen in some of the allowable cost expense category. Now, what I think is going to happen in reality is that there might be some ability to get some of those costs down or reimbursed. But the real thing is that as people ramp up, if you already had this, in your things to do and you haven't done it, then it's really a technical debt that you have to recover from the things that were supposed to be being done and aren't done. So there's obviously the government isn't really going to quote a cost or anything on that. So there's going to be in our opinion, a ramp up cost that's going to have to be that's going to have to go on and be consumed and paid for by the company. And then, over a period of time, there might be some DoD guidance on how that's going to work. I know there was a DoD SOCOM phase 1 SBIR that talked about a $6,500 value coverage. But again, that's all, open and fluid at the moment. Lisa?
My understanding is not too much different from what I've seen and read. There seems to be some confusion about what portion of it is going to be allowable. Is it just the portion for the certification, or the solutions you're putting in place, and how deep that goes? So unfortunately, I'm probably just as confused on that one as the person who asked the question.
All right, thanks so much for your input on all those questions, guys. And thank you to all of our attendees for so many great questions. We really had a lot. We unfortunately didn't have time to get to all of them. So if we did miss your question, I do sincerely apologize. But you feel free to reach out to PJR. And if we can't answer your question, we would be more than happy to direct you to someone who can answer your question. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up for the day. Thank you to all of our speakers again and everyone who took the time to attend. We look forward to seeing you on a future webinar, and keep an eye on our website for that recording and the slides when they become available. I hope everyone has a great rest of their week, and I will see you all next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Amy and Paul, thank you so much for moderating, and thanks again to all of our speakers, Chris, Lisa, and John. Thanks again, and everybody have a great day and a great weekend.
It was my pleasure.